Good evening, everybody. Welcome to my channel. This is 12 Gauge. I'm going to talk to you a little bit tonight about trauma and trauma bonding and what happens whenever we're exposed to trauma and how our body reacts to it. Um, I'm going to mostly focus on the trauma that the surviving roommates may have faced after the traumatic event and how if we're exposed to a lot of trauma in our lives, what may happen to our bodies and how our body changes and how we might even become bonded to the trauma that occurs with us. So this is going to show you a little bit about oh lovely, how certain things happen whenever we're exposed to trauma and how the events in our lives correspond to the trauma in our lives. Um, Everything that's stated here is by educated and researched knowledge. The hypotheses that are stated in this video are researched and they've been proven through studies or literature that shows you about the situation. So, without further ado, let me start this video and then we'll discuss it along the way. Trauma in the brain.
What time? I don't know.
Can you give us an estimate?
Don't remember.
Would your pals remember what time you left the club?
He seemed nice.
She didn't remember much, did she?
I know. I know we've got to waste more time on a daft lecture. We know how to deal with victims. We've had years of experience.
Well, some of us have had more years than others.
I'm in my prime, I'll have you know.
That'll be right.
Today's session is about trauma. The latest in brain science will help you in your work. I'll start with a tour of the parts of the human brain. The reptilian brain maintains basic bodily functions. The limbic system is also instinctive. It deals with fear and pleasure. For example, you pat a dog, it senses pleasure, and without thinking, wags its tail. The neocortex is the site of logic, imagination, planning, and control. It's more sophisticated, but because it's conscious, it's slower than the older parts of the brain. The amygdala is a key part of the limbic system. It has one job: to sense danger and set off the alarm. When it's a matter of survival, the primitive parts of the brain override the conscious part. There are three possible survival responses: fight, flight, or the one that people don't think of, freeze. When the alarm...
Okay, let's talk about that one for a second. Do you remember in the PCA where it spoke about Dylan opening the door for the third time and seeing a man 6 foot or taller wearing a mask with bushy eyebrows? And she stood there in the doorway as he walked by in a frozen shock state. Did you see the last one on there? It says freeze. Many people don't believe that statement. Whenever it comes to danger, you have two responses that we often talk about: fight or flight. But very seldom do we talk about freezing. freezing, being in shock, being fearful, and not realizing basically what's going on. So we just freeze until we get our wits about us to run. Because when it comes to danger, most people are just not going to sit there and fight, especially if they believe that they can't overpower the situation. So think about that a minute. To see something of that nature, to hear what she heard, and then later on to understand the concept that while everything was going on, she finally put it together the next day. And how traumatic that must have been based on the sights, what she heard, and how she responded to it or could have responded to it. And by seeing her roommates in that state the next day, how that signaled another danger going off in her brain. So how did she react then? Let's continue the video.
Alarm goes off. Blood and oxygen are diverted to muscles. Adrenaline floods the body, and all systems that are not crucial to survival are switched off. Normally, the job of the hippocampus is to file memories so you can retrieve them later. But in times of danger, it stops filing memories, which makes it harder to gather evidence later on. Instead, the hippocampus switches to pumping cortisol. What's useful about cortisol is it stops us feeling pain, so we can focus on survival. Can anyone give me an example?
A farming accident where a man carried his own arm for a mile without feeling any pain?
Yes, excellent example. It is an evolutionary safety mechanism which is fast and instinctive. In essence, it's our body's very clever way of protecting us. To recap, an example of the three parts of the brain working.
Okay, let's stop right there for a second. This kind of goes into the generalized examples that you may have heard in life about a mother having her kids trapped in the car or trapped under the car, where she has minuscule seconds to lift the car and protect her children. She has superhuman strength, and she's able to lift the car and get the kids out. Or maybe locked in the cars where she only has a couple minutes and she had that superhuman strength to maybe rip the door off the hinges or rip the door open where she can get her children out. And then afterwards, she's completely spent and exhausted. I talked in my last video or the video before about what it said about the blood going from the muscle to the muscle areas to get what it's needed, the strength to protect the body from the danger. The same thing happens whenever you're exposed with some kind of invading chemical, whether it be drugs, alcohol, that the body does not respond to well, and it views it as a toxin. It does the same thing trying to get it out. All this is trauma. All this is trauma to the brain, to the body, to your existence. So let's continue on.
Working together. You're standing at a bar. Your reptilian brain is keeping your heart beating. You're enjoying the pleasure of a nice pint with your limbic system. You're using your neocortex to work out if there's time for another before the last train. What could happen to make the amygdala kick in? What if this happened? The way you'd respond would depend not on your logical brain, but on your instinctive brain. Being glassed in a bar would be a traumatic experience. Who can give me another example of an event that can cause trauma?
War?
Rape?
A car crash?
Good, yes. Trauma occurs when a person is overwhelmed by something beyond their control. The survival brain takes over the rational brain. It can lead to post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, with symptoms that last at least a month. Vicarious or secondary trauma is something you may experience if you deal with incidents such as rape or sudden death, or think of Lockerbie, Dunblane. You're not superheroes. Having a brain makes you all vulnerable to secondary trauma. It's important to understand that when trauma occurs again and again, it can become complex PTSD, such as in domestic abuse or child sexual abuse. The alarm system in the brain becomes jammed. Memories are stuck in the limbic system, so a trigger can set off the alarm. The trigger could be anything: a colour, a smell, a sound, a sensation. Now, the indicators of trauma. What should you be looking out for?
Depression. Crying a lot.
Yes, that's one response. And at the other end of the spectrum, total numbness.
Nightmares. Flashbacks.
Stress.
Good, yes. And they may feel sick. Also, shame, feelings of guilt, inability to enjoy sex, social isolation, triggers. People often feel overwhelmed by the symptoms of trauma. This can lead to using alcohol or other drugs to block out memories, or self-harm, or dissociation when a person's mind detaches from reality. Indicators can be specific to the type of trauma. Say, dental problems, when someone who was orally abused avoids going to the dentist. A victim of abuse might bond strongly to her abuser. This is known as traumatic bonding, or Stockholm syndrome. And jumbled up memory, when a person's normal recording of memories doesn't work. Can you recall any times you've seen that symptom?
What time? I don't know.
A traumatized person may not seem like her usual self, or may be hypervigilant, on edge, or being startled by everyday things. Everyone is different. You never know what impact trauma will have. Symptoms can change from day to day. So what does all this mean in practice, in your job? A traumatized person.
So let's talk about that a little bit. So let's hypothesize the surviving roommates and the trauma that they've had to experience after the quadruple murder. The one that saw the perpetrator would probably have the most trauma based on the fact that what she heard, what she saw, what she felt, and how she dealt with it. There's probably a lot of guilt and shame there. And the other one, probably the same thing, just not as intense due to the fact that if she did hear something, it hasn't been stated. If she saw anything, it hasn't really been stated with any kind of real receipts. So the other one could have guilt and shame. The one that saw the perpetrator could have PTSD and flashbacks, as it's stated in this video, just because she's been seen in photos laughing and having a good time as it appears, does not mean that internally her body's not shut down. How her body's not internally suffering from triggers that could, you be in a good mood one moment and you're triggered by something, and all of a sudden you go back into your shell to protect yourself from the moment occurring again. Think of it like this. Have you ever had a stressful day? And you get on the phone first thing in the morning after the first stressor occurs and you recall it to somebody. Let's say you almost got sideswiped. You call your significant other and you're talking about nearly getting sideswiped. Automatically, your body goes into fight or flight because it doesn't know the difference between reality and reenactment. So then you get to the office and you tell your coworkers the same story. You get amped up again, your body goes into fight or flight as you're recanting the moment, and then as you're coming down, it's 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 releasing the cortisol. So then at lunch, you call your mother calls you, or somebody, your husband, whoever, bump into a friend, you tell them what happened. The third time you've recanted this story, and the third time your body's going into adrenaline dump, fight or flight, fear, anxiety, and then it crashes the cortisol dump. By the end of the day, however many times you've told this story to people, you're exhausted. You're wiped out. So imagine if you're one of these individuals that lives by chaos and drama all day long. You're having the adrenaline flight or fight, or as it says, freeze, and then you have the cortisol dump. So there's a reason why the cortisol in the midsection gathers, because that's a soothing, calming enzyme released to keep you calm. So if you live by stress, or you have a stressful job, or stressful relationship, or a stressful interaction with life is just so stressful you can't seem to assimilate it in any kind of healthy way. You're living this fight or flight on a daily basis. So think about Dylan and her interpretation with what she saw. She may still be periodically having the post-traumatic stress from it. If it was that intense for her, I'm not talking for her, but if she's getting therapy, it may be helping with some of this. But if somebody doesn't get the needed help for it, they stay in a constant fight or flight realm in their bodies, in their minds. They're constantly looking for the next shoe to fall. They're constantly looking for the next chaos to occur, or they're even creating it. Maybe they're short tempered. Maybe they're annoyed all the time. Maybe they don't like to answer questions because they've had so many questions thrown at them about this situation and they don't know how to deal with it. So one of the victims is traumatized. The second one could be traumatized as well. Mr. Koberger, I'm sure he's being traumatized in jail as well. And I'm not trying to be a sympathizer, but you know what? He created that trauma. Any kind of trauma that he's experiencing up to this point, unless the jury finds him not guilty, then it's probable cause that he is the perpetrator. So the trauma he's experiencing is going to be lifelong until this trial happens. The parents of all the victims of some kind of trauma, every time they go to the court, every video they watch, every article they have shoved in their face, every new conspiracy theory that they hear about, it reenacts the trauma of their children passing. I'm not trying to add to that trauma. I'm trying to give people information to be able to deal with it so that they know what's going on, what they're experiencing. And not just them. Anybody that watches my videos can be obviously stuck in a trauma bond. They could be stuck in a PTSD form, anything that continues to diminish quality of life. So let's go on with the video.
Person's brain is protecting them, but that normal human response of self-protection can get in the way of evidence gathering. The US military has developed new trauma-informed interviewing techniques that you can use to work around this. Research shows that if someone seems vacant, they could be distracted by their traumatic memories. Try to ground them by asking a simple, non-patronizing question such as, "Are you thirsty? Do you want a glass of water?" This can help bring them back to the here and now. Don't expect a logical, linear story. Ask, "What can you recall just now?" Find out what the victim physically felt or saw. Working this way, from the instinctive sensory parts towards the logical parts of the brain, you'll get more results. In conclusion, 4 things for you to take away. Trauma response is the brain in survival mode. Repeated abuse can make trauma symptoms worse. In response to trauma, people will behave in unexpected ways. Remember, trauma is a normal human response to abnormal events.
A human response to abnormal events. That was very informative. I hope you got something out of that. There was trauma bonding that was mentioned and that I mentioned. So let's take a look at this really quickly. And I'll kind of break down some of what it's talking about. Okay. It says, what do you know about trauma bonding? Have you ever heard of trauma bonding before? In your opinion, what is trauma bonding? So, does the word trauma bonding make you feel uncomfortable or broken inside? Has anyone ever suggested that you might be in an abusive relationship currently or in the past? Well, this is on relationships. So, if you're in a toxic relationship or a friendship or any kind of situational event, which, you know, based on the Idaho4, it seemed that some of their relationships were not healthy, but I wouldn't say they were trauma bonding. Based on the information that I've learned um, by research, this is just going to teach you a little bit about trauma bonding and what it is and how to get out of it because it affects every area of your life, especially if you have trauma and PTSD at once. You're more apt to bond yourself to high risk people, places, and things and choices. So, what is trauma bonding? Trauma bonding is the attachment an abused person feels toward their abuser. This is seen explicitly in a relationship with a recurrent pattern of abuse. Trauma bonding can occur within families. You can have families that are traumatic that you cannot escape, but you're always bonded to them because of obligation, employment, friendship, business opportunities. Hopefully, nobody ever is held hostage or is human trafficked, or even in the foster care system. It usually begins as a young child. A bond is created when you're unaware of the cycle of abuse and the hidden agenda associated with positive reinforcement after each occurrence of abuse. The abuser will do the following. They'll confess their love to you. We are one and the same, love bombing, and trying to form a mutual connection. They express regret, devalue the abuse, and makes excuses for the destructive behaviors, words, or actions. They'll gaslight you into changing your perspective and the reality of what really happened. They'll make fake future promises or promise to change. They'll try to make the relationship feel safe and secure again and keep the abused person within the relationship. So if you have anybody that continuously does these things, you might take a look at it. The four-part cycles of abuse are the pressure building. An abusive person or partner often lashes out in response to external stressors, usually things that you cannot even really see as important but trivial, and that seems to be the biggest thing right now. And it's this person builds up pressure until they just blow up. Passive aggressive. There will be an incident of abuse or violence. The abuser will eventually release the built up tension on others. It is an attempt to regain power by creating a sense of control or composure. After the fact, they might apologize, they might buy you things, they might do things to try to smooth over their destructive results. The abuser will seek reconciliation and make empty promises that will never happen again. Well, the empty promise goes away when you get comfortable in the situation again. The empty promises, you come back, I'll never do it again. And guess what? You slide right back into old behavior. The abuser will appear calm and try to calm you down so you remain in the relationship or you do not quit your job if they're the boss or the employer. You ever had a boss that blew up on you for nothing and you tried to quit, but they'd always smooth it over? Please, please don't leave. Please don't leave. I need you. Good grief. I don't know what's going on with this. It's like I've never worked a computer in my life. Various cultures celebrate these trauma bonding relationships because of the misconception of romance and passion. For example, a Latino or Italian family will believe that romance means the following: love, hate, or hot, cold relationship. One partner is treated poorly, to, made to feel less than, to learn to accept less and cling to the moments you're shown affection, given gifts, or attention. That's gaslighting. One partner is emotionally unavailable and leaves you accepting less than you deserve. The abuser is great at getting you into bed, but can leave you feeling empty, confused, and not good enough, especially if the abuser is married or already has a partner. The sex is passionate and hot, but you have nothing else in common or nothing to talk about. You wonder if you're addicted to the trauma bonding sex or the person or the relationship. You find yourself extremely loud, passionate, drama creating roller coaster relationship. Okay, so that talks about that. A healthy relationship can feel like this. They have no passion. We never get in a heated fight. I'm not used to this. This is what happens after you go through a trauma bond. He's lovely, kind, and giving. We banter sometimes. I've been trying to get him angry to get a reaction, but he is easygoing. I don't get it. He's not a risk taker and doesn't push my boundaries. He is so dull. The sex is good, but sometimes something is missing. He is not demanding or passionate in the bedroom. I want him to push me around and dominate me. He has tried, but he is just not romantic like my last partner. He's not possessive or jealous. He doesn't try to control me. I like being directed and told what to do. Does he love me or not? If he loved me, he would do these things to me. I just don't get it. So if you've been in a toxic relationship and then you get out of it and you start seeing somebody that is healthy, these things might arise and you might find them boring. But it doesn't mean it's boring. It means that it's something that you're not used to. So trauma bonding is one reason why leaving an abusive situation can feel puzzling and crushing. It involves positive and loving feelings for an abuser. This can make the abused person feel attached and dependent on their abuser. You might think that, well, they will stop hurting you if you behave or lower your standards, but the cycle will not stop. It is not about you, it is about them. I can tell you a lot without reading these, okay? But I like to read these to just get informative information out there rather than you think I'm making stuff up. Um, it takes an abused individual in a toxic relationship up to 9 times before they actually do leave. And if there hasn't been any criminal offenses or any kind of broken bones or health problems or anything like that due to the abuse, then by the 9th time, if you get out, you're pretty beat up and busted up, and you're not healthy enough to be in a healthy relationship. Enmeshment and individual emotions become blurred. That means that you don't know where you began and where they began and where you leave off. The abuser can be overprotective and will isolate you from your family and friends. Once you're bonded, you will soon experience complete neglect, confusion, and identity. They'll start to answer for you. They'll start to basically run your life, talk for you, and where you're not independent to make your own thoughts. Both the abuser and the abused can experience rage You feel confused, rejected, and abandoned when you're devalued and discarded. Not all abusive situations will result in trauma bonding. And like I said, I can pretty much talk on all this without seeing the slides verbatim. One of the biggest things that an individual should look for whenever you're freshly out of a relationship, whether it was abusive or not, is does their words match their actions? And it's really not about them, it's about you. It's about what you expect in a partner and what you'll settle for and what you won't, what you won't settle for. Because love doesn't hurt and you should never be hurt by words or other people's actions. Is it perfect? No. But it should never end up in the ER. It should never end up in jail. Just because you're used to it does not mean that it's normal. It's normal to you, but it's not a normalized situation for other people. So try to get the help that you need if you're in any of those situations. And like I've said in my previous video, if you need some kind of help, please seek it out. And in case of emergency, please do dial 911. I'm going to end it with this because I got plenty else to talk about. I just don't have a lot of time to continue on tonight. Thank you so much. If you've made it through this video, I hope that you learned something or got something from it. I'm still experimenting and trying to get this right. So in case of the background and everything, I hope that you take my apology where it blends in and out and stuff like that. But I'm doing the best I can. Hope you guys have a wonderful evening and God bless you all. Bye-bye.